This is the Flying Pigeon, the best-selling vehicle ever, with over 500 million produced, and it has barely changed since 1950. In fact, it remains one of the least changed manufactured products of the 20th century, up there with Bic lighters and swing line staplers. Except, it's not as good. This was to China what the Trabant was to East Germany, a not very good, technologically frozen, Western-derived product that you'd wait years for and spend a third of your salary on. It was already 2 decades out of date when it was invented, yet it was treasured anyway. An aspirational Chinese family strived for a wristwatch, a sewing machine, a radio, and a flying pigeon. But that was long ago. Today, the Flying Pigeon is still sold right alongside 3D printers, flying cars, and Amflow e-mountain bikes. So, I bought one to find out why they are so treasured. And just like a Chinese family would have in 1950, I started by overpaying for my Flying Pigeon. For $691, I expected a better pack job, but you'll realize in a moment, there's no point. Mao-era street corner mechanics would use wrenches and hammers to service anything on a Flying Pigeon on the spot. It's part of the appeal. And although this was designed in 1950, it uses technology from the 1930s and 20s. So it's not every day I work on a bicycle with rod brakes. As I tried to get those rod brakes to sort of line up, I used the caliper to check for dish on the front wheel. That's when I realized the joke was on me. Yeah, it's way off. You can just see. The rod brake is a microcosm of everything else on the Flying Pigeon, so let me show you how it works. It starts with these levers which pull on steel rods connected to big flexible forks. That holds the pads. Little posts on either side of the fork fall into slots for guidance, and then when you pull the lever, the posts grind against the slots, guiding the pads to the rim surface. These are Westwood-style rims, which use the inner face, not the sides, as the braking surface. These rod brakes were notoriously bad in the rain, but notably, there's not a whole lot that can go wrong with them. Rods can't seize like cables, and there's no expectation of precision like caliper brakes. A consistent theme across every part on this bike. And these rod brakes were not unique to the Flying Pigeon. A 1930s British rally would have used rod brakes, and they had the same limitations, except they were made with better steel, better quality control, and they worked as well as rod brakes possibly could. Nevertheless, by 1950, Western bicycles had largely moved on to caliper and coaster brakes, yet the Flying Pigeon used rods from the start. And if you can get your hands on a 75-year-old Flying Pigeon and find brake pads for it, you can get them working. Just bend stuff until the pads make contact with the rim. That's the actual repair. Now we're getting somewhere. We just gotta keep bending. One helpful writer documented his method of tuning these rod brakes. He said, grab some cardboard or a block of wood and wedge it between. That's about as far as I read before I realized I was gonna be bending stuff. But all rod brakes, even mediocre ones, eliminate the cable and housing. Sure, it's at the expense of precision, but the advantage is that the same factory can produce more of the parts end-to-end from existing steel stock. This is one of countless examples of ruthless pragmatism on this bike, which make even more sense with historical context. After Mao Zedong won power in 1949, China modeled their economy after Soviet Russia. But to their credit, they decided that people needed a reliable way to get around and immediately ordered a factory in Tianjin to build the nation a bike that was strong, durable, light, and beautiful. Their words. And on July 5th, 1950, the first Flying Pigeon rolled off the assembly line. And it was beautiful. The designer was a factory worker named Huo Baoji, and he based the Pigeon on England's 1932 Rally Roadster. And by based on, I really mean he copied it exactly. Even the tagline, which says, the all-steel bicycle, was copied verbatim from Rally. The bottle dynamo, which powered the lights, was a 1920s Bosch design. The rim profile, the seat, and everything on the Flying Pigeon was a copy of British or German bicycle parts made decades earlier. And it was was done so to a specific price point, 150 yuan, roughly 2 to 4 months' wages for an ordinary worker. Families would wait years in a long queue for their flying pigeon and often needed guanxi, or personal connections, to move up the list. There's a story of a farmer offering his entire harvest to speed up delivery of his flying pigeon. He may have been the only one in town with a flying pigeon. It was a status symbol. When the state controls supply and supply is thin, even a mediocre object becomes a prized, almost sacred possession. But at the time, in the West, families had multiple bicycles, and they may have had internal gear hubs, caliper brakes, and even quick-release skewers, having moved on from the technology of the pigeon decades prior. But the design of the flying pigeon was a deliberate choice. China needed a bike they could build with simple tooling that could be repaired deep in the countryside. A frozen 1932 design delivered exactly that. As more identical pigeons were produced year after year, it not only became less scarce, but also unkillable, immortal. An abandoned or wrecked pigeon was full of parts that perfectly fit your pigeon. The flying pigeon's indestructibility came not from its mediocre build quality, but rather standardization and ubiquity. This design philosophy reminds me a bit of the buffalo bicycle. The buffalo bicycle is designed for the most underserved communities in the world, where parts are scarce and tools are harder to come by. When everyone has the same dead simple bicycle, it's easier and more cost-effective to keep them all running. Now, the buffalo is all but objectively superior to the pigeon in almost every way, but there's only about 1 million of them. Need I remind you that there are 500 million flying pigeons, and they're still rolling off the assembly line unchanged, cothered cranks and all. This fact that you can buy a mostly unchanged flying pigeon in 2026 is legitimately confusing. It's not rare. These have got to be completely worthless in China. I needn't remind you how many are out there. And do you know what other bikes China makes? All of them, or at least more than half of the global supply. And if you live in China today, you might get your bike parts delivered by drone. You're probably riding an e-bike or driving an electric car that goes 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds. Even the most underserved communities in China have better options now than the pigeon. Tianjin Flying Pigeon Cycle Manufacturing Company Limited sells a lot of other bikes now, including e-bikes and mountain bikes, but the flying pigeon is like the Chinese equivalent of the bald eagle. It's a symbol. It carries cultural significance. And so they don't want to change it. As I said, it's a frozen design from the 1930s, so the fact that I find everything on it weird and interesting is no coincidence. It's kind of like a time capsule, and that raises an interesting question. What's the story with this bike? Well, I got this one on eBay, and very likely whoever bought it paid a lot less than I did. To the best of my knowledge, it's from 2009, give or take a couple of years. I'm judging that by certain markings and the condition of the tires, which actually do seem original. A US importer at one time sold a lot of these, and we can only assume it was to collectors and enthusiasts. This was clearly ridden, but despite the apathetic pack job, it's actually kind of in great shape. And yes, I was able to get everything working, including that bottle dynamo. Look at that. Truth be told, I didn't know much about the pigeon when I ordered it, and I certainly didn't expect to see wires. By 1950, bottle dynamos were about 30 years old, and hub dynamos were the premium option. But these little guys are super reliable and inexpensive to produce. It was the right choice. When you flip this lever, it rolls against the tire and creates an AC current, like in your house, but at more like 3 to 6 volts and at no particular frequency. It not only powers a small incandescent bulb on the unit itself, but also the rear light. One wire runs from the dynamo into the frame and through the skinny little support for the rear fender. But why only one wire? Doesn't it need positive and negative? Well, on an AC circuit like this, there's not much of a difference between positive and negative, but you still do need 2 contacts. And in this case, the frame is used as ground. That's actually not weird at all. Cars are done like that, which is why the negative on your car battery is bolted to the chassis. No, what makes this peculiar is the path. The electricity needs to travel, of course, through the mount and into the fork, but then it actually travels through individual ball bearings inside the headset, grease and all. Then it goes into the main steel frame, into the fender, and then to the contact on the rear light. This would never fly in the modern day, But it works, and you've got to admire pragmatism of this kind. This Dynamo is basically immortal. No brushes, no commutator. It just dumps unregulated AC current into a simple light bulb, which happily eats filthy, noisy electricity. Now, when this thing is engaged, the drag is noticeable, but not terrible. You're not gonna win any races on this bike anyway. No, this was not a race bike. It was a utility bike. The rack and the basket are purpose-made for the Pigeon. Just look at how the support on the front basket goes around the light. Adding to the functionality, of course, it had full fenders front and rear to keep water from splashing up. It didn't help much for stopping the bike in the wet, but it would have kept you dry. And although these are far from uncommon, you might have noticed these clear covers on the rear rack. In the 1950s, this might have been a net or a metal panel, but it was there and it kept clothing from getting caught in the rear wheel, be it a coat or skirt. But it kind of serves another purpose. Back in the day, carrying a passenger back there would have been the norm, and so this helps guard a passenger's feet from the spokes. And it would have been comforting to know your passenger's feet were safe from the spokes as you careen towards a railroad crossing with rod brakes. The next one serves a dual purpose, the chain guard. You almost never see a full chain guard anymore, and indeed, this was not unique to the Pigeon, but it's awesome. This would have kept a dress or a pant leg from getting all greasy, or worse yet, caught in the drivetrain, but it also extends the life of the drivetrain significantly. This bike isn't that old, but the chain is still in remarkable condition for its age. If I take this little cover off back here, you can see it's unbelievably clean and grime-free. You might think this is just covering one side, but if you look at it from any angle, it's incredibly sealed up. This would most certainly be another painful step when servicing the bike, but on the other hand, it prevents the bike from needing more service. And if you look at the shape of it, you can tell they kind of expect that you're not gonna have perfect chain tension all the time. It actually bows out a bit, which would help when you're going over bumps and the chain is slapping up and down. But also, it would help if the chain was just hanging down a little bit. And it looks super cool. It even sounds cool. Listen to this. Yes, the rear hub note on this bike would otherwise be kind of ordinary, but owing to this thin metal panel acting like a speaker diaphragm, it really projects and sounds cool. I don't know if you can get a sense of its timbre on camera, but it's so cool. Another really cool functional item is the seat. This is sometimes referred to as a sprung leather mattress saddle. You've probably seen saddles with springs in the rear, but this one has springs in the front too. This looks a lot like the Brooks saddle that you would have found on the Rally Roadster, but it's likely a fraction of the quality. And that's okay. It's still really comfortable and looks cool. But one of the most remarkable things about the saddle is that despite being an original part, it does not say Flying Pigeon on it. Yeah, they printed Flying Pigeon in so many places on this bike, you would think they were afraid everyone was gonna forget. The chain guard says Flying Pigeon. The stem handlebar combo has the dove emblem on it. The fork says Flying Pigeon. The rear fender says Flying Pigeon. The luggage rack has the dove emblem, the head badge, the down tube, and then they went crazy on the seat tube. It says Flying Pigeon, the all-steel bicycle, the tagline that they stole, and then the logo above it says Flying Pigeon twice. But do you know where it doesn't say Flying Pigeon? The top tube. Yeah, here on the top tube is the nicest Made in China stamp I have ever seen, baked under the clear coat in a very tasteful font. And I think that's one of the coolest things on the entire bike. Yeah, you see these carbon handlebars? They're made to look as if they came from Italy, but they fool no one. Just look at this logo. Look at the tagline. Alpha Pasca, the extreme performance carbon. Many Chinese companies try to hide the fact that their products are made in China, but why? For a long time now, China has made everything, and not just as a manufacturing partner for Western designed products. We can stay out of the politics of it all and still acknowledge that China is really, really good at making stuff. This bike proudly displays that Made in China badge in a prominent location because it was not only transportation, but a symbol of national pride. This was not primarily for export, this was for the Chinese people. This was one of the first products that China was able to make consistently in huge numbers. Certainly the most prominent example, and it could have marked the beginning of their ascension to their current status as a world leader in manufacturing. Every idea on this bike was copied from British or German products. It's lower quality in every way. It was so unoriginal that even the tagline was stolen verbatim. But that's not what they took pride in. It's not the specific design or the invention itself. From the 1950s through the 70s, the Flying Pigeon became so dominant that the Dove logo effectively became a synonym for bicycle, and some referred to China as the Kingdom of Bicycles. In 1989, US President George H.W. Bush received a pair of Flying Pigeons as a formal state gift in Beijing. This was for a very specific reason, and the gift was deeply personal. See, in the mid-70s, Bush had been the US envoy to China, and instead of riding in a limousine through the city as other diplomats would have, he and his wife Barbara would ride bicycles through the city, just like the workers, just like everyday Chinese people. He was then remembered fondly as the bicycle riding ambassador, and they didn't forget that. 15 years later, that same bicycle riding ambassador was effectively the most powerful human being on the planet. So when he was gifted those Flying Pigeons, it wasn't like, hey, here's a pair of $150 outdated bikes for you and Barbara. It was perhaps the most thoughtful gift they could have chosen, and it was symbolic. It must have strengthened the nation's pride in the Flying Pigeon. Here, the most powerful man in the world was graciously accepting, as a state gift, the same bicycle a Chinese factory worker would have worked months for and cherished. So yes, this is objectively the most ordinary bicycle on planet Earth. Objectively, the least unique vehicle ever produced. But when you look at the history and put everything in context, it makes sense that these are still sold completely unchanged by the same company, and that people still do want to own them. So I'm gonna end up donating my Flying Pigeon to the Little Congress Bicycle Museum in Tennessee, because I think that's where it belongs, in a free museum where people can gawk at it. But first, I'm gonna take you for a ride on it and plan my stops very carefully. Now, there's some commuter bikes that I've ridden, like the Brompton, that actually are faster than you think they would be. This is not like that. This actually goads you to go slower. Geared kind of amazingly high for what it is. The bike is actually really comfortable. Tons of compliance, really soft steel, smooth as heck. Even when you go over little bumpy sections or in the dirt, I've been riding it all day. It is impressive, but it is not that easy to pedal around. I'm actually slightly out of breath just from like starting up and going up little hills and stuff. And the brakes, they work, you know, at the speeds that you would have any business going on a Flying Pigeon. Here, we're going down a hill here, you probably can't see, but able to manage my speed just fine. But when you apply the brakes, the bike shakes everywhere. You can see in the basket, because any undulation in the rim gets kind of transferred to the entire bike. Let's see what's up with this bottle magneto. I'm gonna reach down. Okay, you can definitely feel the resistance, but honestly, it's not that bad. Oh, it's so hard to accelerate on this thing. It is meant to get pedaling and continue going. This basket is actually big. This would be great for going to the grocery store or something. I can't overstate how much compliance this bike has. Now, the seat, which I said is comfortable, it is at first. You sit on this thing all day. It's something you would definitely have to get used to. It's kind of hard, and yeah, it's great over bumps. Like, you know, it gives, but the sides are kind of hard and they tend to dig in. You know, higher speeds, like I have momentum and now I'm cranking up this hill, you barely feel the bottle dynamo. I'm just standing up and laying down on these cotter pin cranks. I can even feel them starting to wiggle. That's the problem with cottered cranks, is they tend to loosen up, and once that happens, it's a slippery slope. So could I daily this bike? I mean, I've lived in a downtown area before, and I rode my bike everywhere. I wouldn't want to ride this one. One reason is the types of things that I tend to do on bicycles. Go up and down curbs, go off curbs. It'd just be a maintenance nightmare. It would just be just for the looks, for the novelty. But also, the brakes are legitimately limited. This legitimately limits your speed and everything. And even if I was just gonna get like kind of a cruising bike for going slow, I would rather a different one, but it is cool. It is kind of a showpiece. I could see owning something like this if I lived in a city, but really not that great of a bike. Now, there are some things that are pretty sweet about it. First of all, kickstand, super sweet. It's one of those two-sided kickstands, and then bends everywhere, and then you lock it into place. Again, looks super cool. Bell is sweet. It's cool that there's actually nothing you need to buy for this bike. It has the basket, it has the rack, like a proper utility bike should. It has it all. It even has the cover for the chain. It's not for bicycle enthusiasts, it's for regular people to get around. I can only imagine people in China watching this video on a VPN right now saying, he paid $690 what dollars for a Flying Pigeon? You can just get these anywhere in China, and there's probably garages and sheds and closets just filled with them all over the countryside. But here, it's pretty unique. It's a really cool bike, and it is like a time machine, because even though it was made in 1950, it used 1930s technology, and they still make them today with the same basic tooling and everything. It's really, really crazy. And so this was a really, really interesting bike for me to check out. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. And if you didn't, I hope you at least found it entertaining. Thanks for riding with me today, and I'll see you next time.